Juliet Vaughn walked into her sister's wedding alone. Everyone saw her as the pitiful 30-something woman, too ambitious, too single, too much. They whispered, smirked, and dismissed her. But when Edward Sinclair, a billionaire titan, stood up and bowed to Juliet, praising her as the visionary who changed his global strategy, the entire room fell silent. For the first time, they saw her worth. But Juliet realized something deeper. True power isn't their approval. It's building a life so undeniable that their applause no longer matters. And with that, she walked away, free. My name is Juliet Vaughn. I walked into my sister's wedding alone, entirely deliberately alone. Not because I couldn't find someone to bring trust me, there were men I could have called. It was because I wanted to remember what it felt like to stand tall without anyone shielding me, without a hand gripping mine to say, "Don't worry, I've got you," as if that was what I needed to survive this. That walk into the grand ballroom felt like stepping into a courtroom where my verdict was already written guilty of being over 30, unmarried, and far too successful for my own good. As I crossed the marble floor under chandeliers dripping with crystals, I felt the eyes. Heads turned, but not with curiosity or welcome. They turned with judgment sharpened to a fine edge. I heard the whispers. I saw the tight-lipped smirks of my sister's new in-laws as they leaned together, eyes scanning my dress, my bare hands pausing at the emptiness of my left ring finger. One woman didn't even bother to lower her voice. "Poor thing. Still can't find anyone to bring," she murmured, a statement dripping with pity, so false it stung more than any outright insult. My sister Vanessa didn't even glance my way. She was busy posing for the cameras, flashing all her teeth alongside her new husband and his impossibly polished family. She looked radiant under the curated lighting, hair curled into perfect golden waves, lips lacquered in a shade that screamed elegance and softness all at once. To her, I wasn't even worth a nod. I was not part of her display. I wasn't the supporting character she needed for her bridal highlight reel. I was the afterthought, the woman they hoped would slip into a back row seat and remain invisible. I could have left. Honestly, I thought about it. I could have turned right around, driven home, and poured myself a glass of that obscenely expensive scotch I keep for moments when the world reminds me I'm not one of them. But I didn't leave. Something in me, something stubborn and quietly vengeful, whispered, "Stay. Face them. Don't flinch." Because I've spent my entire life refusing to flinch. When investors told me no woman could run a tech firm without being devoured alive, I didn't flinch. When I coded through fevers and 3 a.m. panic attacks to launch my first product, I didn't flinch. And standing there under those crystal chandeliers surrounded by dresses that cost more than a month's payroll for my team, I refused to flinch now. The truth is, I knew exactly what I looked like walking in alone. Black dress tailored to clean severe lines. No sparkles. Hair slicked into a low knot. Minimal jewelry, just a thin platinum bar at my throat. I looked like a boardroom executive who had taken a wrong turn and ended up at a fairy tale wedding. And maybe that was true. But here's what they didn't know: I like looking like myself. Because the world will twist you into whatever shape makes them most comfortable if you let them. That day I chose discomfort. I chose truth. As I moved deeper into the ballroom, past tables overflowing with white roses and flickering candles, I saw them, Vanessa's new in-laws, gathered in shimmering gowns and sharp tuxedos. Champagne glasses clinked. Their conversations paused as I walked by. I heard the words they didn't say. I saw their eyes measure me, calculate me, then dismiss me. "Is that the one who's single?" A woman asked in the same tone you'd used to whisper, "Is that the one who just got out of rehab?" Or, "Is that the one who's been unemployed for months?" Yes, that's me, I thought. The single one. The one who builds companies instead of building a curated life of brunches and flower walls and couple selfies. The one you'll never understand because you've spent your entire life learning how to be wanted, while I spent mine learning how to build something no one could take away. Vanessa never looked up as I passed her during the pre-ceremony photos. "Hi, Juliet," she said quickly, not waiting for my response. It didn't sting the way it once would have. Her indifference felt like background noise I'd long learned to tune out. So I found my seat, alone. Exactly how they expected me to. Exactly how they wanted me to. Because women like me, women who walk into rooms alone without apologizing, will always unsettle the world. They'll always whisper about us, label us cold or intimidating or unlovable. But what they don't realize is this: walking in alone is not the saddest thing. Needing to belong to people who only love the version of you they've invented in their minds, that is. The ballroom smelled like lilies and imported champagne. Every detail screamed curated perfection, from the towering white floral arches to the crystal napkin rings embossed with Vanessa and Logan's initials in gold foil. A string quartet played something elegant and forgettable near the front stage, while servers floated by carrying silver trays of canapes topped with edible gold flakes. I walked through it all, a silent contradiction to the dreamscape around me. Every table I passed was filled with smiling faces, people leaning into each other, laughing with that easy confidence of belonging. They belonged here because they were invited to belong, because they fit. I didn't. And that was the first thing everyone noticed. As I stepped further in, I felt it, the quick flick of eyes up and down my body, the pause at my left hand, the dismissal in their gaze when they saw no ring. Some hid their curiosity behind polite smiles. Others didn't bother. They turned to the person beside them, whispered words half muffled by clinking glasses and violins. I heard fragments. "She came alone. Poor thing at her age. Such a shame, she's so intense. She's the tech one, right? Vanessa's sister, the one who never comes home for holidays." Each word was a paper cut, sharp, shallow, barely noticeable until it starts to sting. But I didn't flinch. I kept my shoulders straight, chin lifted, expression calm, betraying nothing of the anger, the ache, the quiet exhaustion of having to prove my worth in rooms like this for as long as I could remember. When I reached my table, positioned safely near the back, away from the bridal party, away from any photos that might go on social media, I set my clutch down and sat. Two distant cousins were already there, both draped in chiffon pastels with hair curled into careful spirals. They turned to me, eyes widening with almost theatrical surprise. "Oh, you didn't bring anyone?" one asked, lips curling in the polite horror reserved for faux pas too embarrassing to address outright. "No," I replied, simply smoothing the napkin across my lap. "I just thought, well, someone like you so accomplished, I figured you'd have someone by now." She continued, stirring her martini with a tiny gold cocktail pick. Her voice held the cadence of a compliment, but the pause between her words made it anything but. "Someone like me." The phrase echoed in my head. What does that even mean? Someone like me, too focused, too independent, too unwilling to soften her edges to fit into theirs. I smiled faintly. "No, just me tonight." She blinked, then nodded, returning to her drink as if my presence was an item on her checklist she could now cross off. I glanced toward the front of the room. Vanessa was radiant, seated with Logan's family at the head table. Her new mother-in-law hovered beside her, whispering something that made Vanessa throw her head back in perfect camera-ready laughter. Her diamond earrings sparkled under the chandeliers, catching light with every practiced movement of her neck. From where I sat, it looked like a painting, Vanessa the Golden Daughter framed in white roses, champagne flutes, and proud glances. Around her, Logan's family glowed with the satisfaction of acquiring something beautiful to display in their curated life. Their eyes flicked to me occasionally, assessing, dismissing. I was not part of this portrait. I was a shadow that had accidentally wandered onto their canvas. At one point, the mother-in-law Gloria turned fully in her seat to look at me. Her face was immobile skin pulled tight from what I assumed was an expensive but overly enthusiastic surgeon. She narrowed her eyes slightly before leaning into the woman next to her. "She's the sister, right? The one who's always working." They chuckled softly. Not loud enough to be called out, but just enough to sting. I turned away, exhaling slowly. In that moment, I reminded myself I've built companies under market pressures these people couldn't fathom. I've pitched to stone-faced investors who bet millions on the strength of my strategy. I've coded entire systems overnight to save a launch and pay my team. But this small, petty cruelty still hurt, in a way boardroom battles never could. Because there's a particular ache that comes from being alien in your own family. From knowing that no matter how much you achieve to them, you're still just the girl who didn't fit into their story. And yet, as I sat there listening to the music swell around me, watching the flickering candlelight dance across crystal goblets, I felt something else beneath the ache. A quiet defiance, a cold, clear strength. Let them look. Let them whisper. Because one day they'll understand that women like me, women who walk in alone, unbowed, unapologetic, are the ones who change everything, whether or not anyone ever claps for us. I wasn't always the woman who walked into ballrooms alone. Once I was just a little girl in a house that always felt too small for the weight of unspoken comparisons. Growing up in the Vaughn household was like living on a stage you never auditioned for. Every dinner felt like opening night, and Vanessa, well, she was the star before she could even talk. From the moment she learned to walk in those tiny white patent shoes, Vanessa commanded attention effortlessly. She was golden-haired, blue-eyed, with cheeks that dimpled when she smiled, and a laugh that sounded like it had been bottled straight from an angelic toy commercial. Relatives adored her at family barbecues. Neighbors cooed over her in grocery store aisles. Teachers called her our sunshine. And me? I was the serious one. The girl with questions too big for their patience and eyes too intense for their comfort. At those barbecues, while Vanessa twirled in her pink dresses for applause, I was the child in the corner dissecting the sprinkler mechanism to see how it rotated. "Let Vanessa have her moment, honey," my father would say gently if I tried to show him what I'd discovered. So I learned to fold my discoveries into silence. Because no one clapped for the girl who wanted to understand how the world worked instead of performing for it. My world was numbers, ideas, and possibilities invisible to everyone else. At 10, I took apart our microwave just to see how it heated food from the inside out. By 14, I'd built a prototype for a self-timing oven using spare circuit boards and a discarded digital clock from the garage. While Vanessa was practicing her cheerleading routines in front of the living room mirror, I was under my blanket with a flashlight scribbling solutions to advanced calculus problems photocopied from my older cousin's college textbook. Each time I solved an equation, it felt like cracking open a hidden door in the universe, an entry into a place where applause wasn't required for value. My parents didn't discourage me exactly. They just didn't know what to do with me. "You'll grow out of this tech stuff," my mom said once, moments before grounding me for skipping a school dance to attend a regional robotics camp. Her words weren't cruel. They were casual, dismissive, as if my passion was an eccentric phase, like kids who insist on eating only chicken nuggets for a year. Vanessa, meanwhile, was rewarded for being pretty, for being agreeable, for making the world feel comfortable around her. I was tolerated for being strange, for never quite smoothing my edges enough to fit. She brought home trophies for beauty pageants and perfectly posed recital photos. I brought home medals from science Olympiads that were left in a drawer, gathering dust beneath expired coupons and church mailers. By the time we reached high school, the gap between us had grown from a hairline crack into a canyon. Vanessa dated the quarterback. She went to prom with the class president. I spent those nights staring at constellations through my homemade telescope, wondering if the universe was infinite because there were so many places to belong, or because it was designed to remind us we're always alone. Our mother would peek into my room sometimes, leaning against the door frame as I sat cross-legged on the carpet, soldering microchips onto breadboards. "Don't stay up too late, Juliet," she'd say, her voice lined with faint annoyance, the same way you'd remind someone to turn off the lights before bed. Then she'd turn away, already thinking about Vanessa's upcoming dance showcase or which dress would photograph better under stage lighting. I never blamed Vanessa. She was only doing what she'd been taught to do, shine. But as we grew older, that shine became blinding. She married young, her first love, a big white wedding with a ballroom just like today's. It didn't last. Neither did the second marriage. But the third Logan, that was different. He came with land business chains and connections that turned heads at country clubs. For Vanessa, it wasn't just love. It was legacy, security, prestige, and our parents were thrilled. Dinners were hosted. Family portraits reprinted with new surnames added like trophies on a shelf. My name came up only as an obligation. Of course, we'll invite her. "She's still family," I overheard my mother say once. But before I could feel even a flicker of belonging, her voice turned cold with warning. "Just make sure she doesn't make it about herself," as if I ever had. So I booked my flight, RSVP'd for one, cleared my schedule. Not because I had the time or because I wanted to celebrate her curated fairy tale, but because I needed to see for myself if the canyon between us had finally swallowed any bridge that might have existed. And as I sat there now in the glittering ballroom filled with people who didn't know me but felt entitled to judge me, I thought about that little girl in the corner of the barbecue staring at the sprinkler's rotating arm, wondering why no one else was fascinated by how it moved in perfect circles. Maybe that was who I'd always be, the girl who wanted to understand the mechanics of a world designed only to be admired from afar. And maybe that was okay. By the time we reached our 20s, Vanessa and I had become two parallel lines that would never meet again. She stepped seamlessly into adulthood as if there were carefully placed stepping stones waiting just for her. College was a social playground she glided through with sorority parties, leadership awards, and endless suitors who wrote her love letters folded into heart shapes. After graduation, she moved in with her college boyfriend, a real estate agent, with perfectly coiffed hair and an endless stash of gym selfies. They married in a lavish ballroom with blush roses cascading down crystal pillars. I remember standing in the back row even then, my black sheath dress a stark contrast to her dreamy pastel palette. Their marriage didn't last. Infidelity, irreconcilable differences, whatever polite phrases her circle used to disguise the truth. But Vanessa was never one to falter long. Within a year, she married again, this time to an ambitious sales director who promised her lakeside weekends and candlelit dinners on balconies overlooking city skylines. That marriage crumbled faster. He left with an executive assistant half his age and a quarter of Vanessa's steel-edged brilliance. I watched from afar as she posted curated photos of yoga retreats and brunch mimosas, her captions laced with philosophical optimism about new chapters. Then came Logan. Logan was different. He didn't just bring status, he was status. His family owned real estate developments, restaurant chains, private vineyards, and equity stakes in companies with names that made Wall Street lean forward. He wasn't strikingly handsome. He was strikingly powerful, the kind of man whose watch cost more than my first angel investment round. The kind of man who never needed to raise his voice because silence itself obeyed him. For Vanessa, Logan wasn't just love. He was her final debut. Her coronation into a world she'd always aspired to belong to, where family names carried weight heavier than individual identities, where dinner invitations came embossed in gold and the charities you supported became markers of your social architecture. Our parents were beyond thrilled. I heard the excitement in my mother's voice even through the clipped voicemail she left me. "He's wonderful, Juliet. So respectful. His family is so well connected. They're just lovely people." Lovely. A word my mother reserved for imported candle sets, curated charcuterie boards, and her favorite neighbors who shared her worldview. She never used it for me. They hosted dinners to celebrate the engagement, printed new family portraits featuring Logan's arm around Vanessa's waist, his watch gleaming in every shot. My name came up only when logistics were discussed. "We'll seat her near the back," I heard my mother say once. "She'll be fine there. Just make sure she doesn't say anything too work-related." Too work-related, as if I would stand up mid-toast and launch into a keynote on scalable blockchain ecosystems. As if my mere presence was an inconvenience they had to preemptively contain. When the wedding invitation arrived, it felt less like an invitation and more like a command performance. White cardstock with gold embossed calligraphy addressed to Ms. Juliet Vaughn and guest. I RSVP'd for one. The morning of the wedding, my mother called. Her voice was chipper with an undertone of anxiety, like she was ticking boxes off a mental list. "You're not going to wear anything too loud or businessy, right? This isn't a summit, Juliet. Try to blend in." Okay, try to blend in. I almost laughed. Blend in with whom I'd spent my entire life standing apart, not out of defiance, but out of inevitability. You can't blend in when the world you're asked to merge with was never built for you in the first place. "Sure, Mom," I said instead. "I'll do my best." And so I arrived alone. I wore black, clean lines, no sequins hair pulled into a low knot, a slim platinum necklace resting against my collarbone. My makeup was sharp but understated. I looked exactly like myself. Walking into that ballroom, I felt every stare, the glances that lingered with surprised curiosity, then quick dismissal. To them, I was a puzzle piece they'd long stopped trying to fit. Vanessa's new in-laws gathered near the floral arch, sipping champagne with bored poise. One of the aunts nudged another and whispered, "Is that the one who's single?" as though asking if I was the family member recently released on parole. I didn't flinch. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting. Because no matter how many boardrooms I conquered, how many markets I disrupted, or how many conferences invited me as keynote speaker, there was still a tiny part of me, a remnant of that child who once tried to show her father how a sprinkler rotated, that wanted them to say, "Look at her, look what she's done." But that part was smaller now, distant, like a star you can still see but no longer feel the heat from. Vanessa passed me during the pre-ceremony photos. Her smile flickered across her lips without reaching her eyes. "Hi, Juliet," she said, the words rolling out with mechanical efficiency. She didn't wait for my response before pivoting back toward Logan, her veil fluttering like a silken wave of triumph behind her. And in that moment, I realized something that felt both painful and liberating. We had stopped being sisters a long time ago. Now we were just two women who shared the same origin story, but chose to write entirely different endings. The pre-ceremony hour felt like purgatory draped in chiffon and white roses. Guests gathered in clusters beneath the vaulted ceilings, their chatter bubbling with the kind of rehearsed enthusiasm reserved for weddings, charity galas, and other events where social currency is exchanged in glances and polite laughter. Servers weave between them, carrying flutes of champagne on silver trays, offering canapes arranged with surgical precision. I stood near the back of the ballroom, pretending to study the floral arrangements lining the aisle. Each bouquet was a blinding blend of cream peonies, pale pink garden roses, and cascading orchids. Perfect, expensive, designed for the inevitable Instagram posts that would follow. Around me, conversations flowed like gentle poison. Did you hear Logan's parents are gifting them the vineyard as a wedding present? She looks stunning in that dress. Of course she does. Vanessa's always been blessed. I heard her sisters here alone. Poor thing. Imagine coming to a wedding at that age without a +1. The words floated through the room like stray feathers, soft enough to appear harmless, sharp enough to pierce skin if they landed just right. I felt each one brush against me, but refused to let them sink in. Instead, I focused on breathing. In, out, in, out. A meditation I'd taught myself years ago in investor boardrooms where male colleagues interrupted me mid-sentence or repeated my ideas back to me as if they'd just conjured brilliance from thin air. In those rooms, I learned to keep my pulse steady, my face calm, my voice low and certain. A woman in a champagne-colored dress turned toward me, blinking wide eyes rimmed with perfect black liner. "Juliet Wright?" I nodded, forcing a polite smile. "I'm Logan's cousin Meredith. We met at their engagement dinner briefly." I searched my memory, but came up blank. She didn't wait for my response. "So, no one with you tonight?" Her smile was sympathetic, like she was speaking to an abandoned pet at a shelter. "No, just me." "Oh." She paused, studying my face as though deciphering how someone could willingly arrive alone. "Well, I'm sure you'll find someone soon. I mean, you're very successful." She meant it as a compliment. The hesitation between her words turned it into a condemnation. Successful as if it were a disease. Successful as if it explained everything about why I was here alone. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I nodded again. "Thank you." She drifted away into a swirl of perfume and pastel satin, leaving me in her wake standing like an island against the tide of guests flowing around me. I caught sight of Vanessa near the altar, surrounded by her bridesmaids. They fluttered around her, adjusting her veil, reapplying her lip gloss, ensuring every strand of golden hair curled at just the right angle. She stood still in the center, eyes half-lidded, a faint smile playing on her lips, as if she could already see the photos that would come from this moment. For a brief second, she looked up, and her eyes met mine. There was no recognition there, no warmth, just mild annoyance, like I was a fly that had landed too close to her champagne flute. Then she turned away, whispering something to her maid of honor, who erupted into a bright, tinkling laugh. I felt the old ache, then quick and sharp, like biting down on tinfoil. The ache of knowing that no matter what I built, no matter how many markets I conquered, my presence here would always feel like an intrusion. A reminder of something they didn't want to acknowledge, that a woman could choose herself and still be whole. "Don't make it about you." My mother's voice echoed in my memory, as if I ever had. I found my seat quietly, far back from the aisle, exactly where they'd placed me. The rows filled with guests coordinated in pastel and navy, every couple arranged for aesthetic symmetry. I sat alone among them, like a rogue data point in a perfect distribution curve. The ceremony music began to swell, signaling that Vanessa's grand entrance was moments away. Guests turned toward the back, ready to catch their first glimpse of the bride in her designer gown. And that's when I heard it. "Is she really here alone?" a woman whispered behind me. "Yes, poor thing. She's brilliant, apparently. Tech something. But you know, of course, those women always end up alone. Too intimidating, too cold." Their voices trailed off as the wedding planner's assistant gestured urgently for everyone to stand. The guests rose in unison, rows of polished shoes shuffling against marble floors. The string quartet struck the first notes of the bridal march. I stood too, smoothing the fabric of my dress, lifting my chin and feeling every molecule of my solitude. Alone. Unapologetically. Because there is a certain kind of power in standing by yourself while everyone else waits for someone to lead them down the aisle. And as Vanessa appeared in the archway, radiant and beaming, the room sighed with collective admiration. Phones rose in synchrony, capturing her perfection frame by frame. I watched her walk past me, veiled and victorious. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did and chose not to. And for the first time in years, I realized I didn't need her to, because while she was stepping into a life built on someone else's name, I was standing in the quiet certainty of my own. The ceremony unfolded with choreographed perfection. Vanessa glided down the aisle beneath a floral arch that looked big enough to shelter a small car. The string quartet played something soft and triumphant, swelling at each deliberate pause in her steps. Guests leaned forward, sighing at her beauty, at her radiance, at the manufactured grace that wrapped around her like a designer shawl. I stood in the back watching it all, with a kind of detached clarity. The ceremony felt less like a wedding and more like a live-streamed brand launch. Every detail was curated for aesthetic impact, the drone cameras hovering near the ceiling to capture sweeping cinematic shots. The flower girl flown in from a child modeling agency, the vows delivered with strategic pauses to allow for tears and applause. I wondered as Vanessa reached Logan at the altar and took his hands whether she felt it too, the performative weight of the moment. Or maybe she truly believed in it. Maybe this was the culmination of everything she had been taught to value: beauty, belonging, applause. Their vows were polished and Instagram ready. Vanessa's voice trembled in all the right places, breaking just enough to sound vulnerable before regaining composure for the next line. Logan's vows were brief, ending with a wink that made the audience laugh softly, adoringly. I promise to always keep your coffee stocked and your Wi-Fi strong, he said, earning an affectionate murmur from the crowd. I forced a polite smile. They were perfect. Perfect in the way porcelain is perfect, beautiful, pristine, and dangerously easy to shatter. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the room erupted into applause. Guests rose to their feet, clapping, some wiping tears from their eyes as the newlyweds kissed beneath the archway of blooms. I clapped too. It felt mechanical, my hands moving with the crowd's rhythm. Inside, I felt nothing, not bitterness, not envy, just a hollow neutrality, like watching a movie you've seen too many times to feel anything new. As guests streamed out for cocktail hour, I remained in my seat a moment longer. The marble floor gleamed beneath my heels, reflecting rows of empty chairs draped in blush satin ribbons. I listened to the echo of footsteps and laughter fading into the reception hall. For a fleeting second, I imagined what it would feel like to stand at that altar. Would it be exhilarating, terrifying, or simply irrelevant? Because here's the truth. No one wants to admit marriage isn't the finish line. For some, it's just the starting point of a life curated to meet expectations rather than truth. I rose slowly, gathering my clutch, and made my way to the reception. The ballroom had been transformed in the brief interlude. Chandeliers dimmed to a golden glow. Tables were rearranged into long banquet rows, each place setting marked with handwritten name cards and monogrammed napkins. Signature cocktails were already circulating, each with sprigs of rosemary tucked artfully beside glistening ice cubes. I found my seat near the back, flanked by two cousins who spent the first 10 minutes discussing wedding hashtags and boutique Pilates studios. They turned to me once, briefly. "You didn't bring anyone?" one asked, sipping her champagne. "No," I replied. "Oh, well, good for you," she said with an awkward little laugh, as if independence was a participation trophy she wasn't quite sure how to award. From my table, I could see Vanessa at the front, encircled by Logan's family. They hovered around her like she was a prize they'd won at auction, each touch on her arm a subtle claim of ownership. Logan's mother, Gloria, watched Vanessa with tight-lipped approval, her surgically smooth face betraying nothing but calculation. At one point, Gloria's gaze flicked toward me. She leaned into a woman beside her, whispering something that made them both smile with quiet amusement. I didn't need to hear the words to know what they were. I'd heard versions of them all my life. "She's too cold." too ambitious, too much, too much. I almost laughed. What they didn't understand was that too much is exactly what saved me. Too much curiosity to settle, too much defiance to stay silent, too much ambition to accept smallness as my fate. But still, as I sat there with my untouched cocktail and polite smile, I felt the alienation settle over me like a second skin. There is a particular ache that comes from being an outsider in your own family. It's not loud, it doesn't scream or wail. It simply hums beneath your ribs like an old sad song you can't quite remember the lyrics to. The speeches began soon after. Toasts from bridesmaids with tearful nostalgia, groomsmen with raunchy inside jokes. Guests laughed, clapped, dabbed at their eyes. I clapped too, each motion feeling like performance art, and then Vanessa approached my table. Her gown swept elegantly behind her veil, pinned back makeup flawless under the amber lights. She smiled at me, but it was tight brittle at the edges. I just wanted to check in. She said, her voice as soft and polished as her diamond earrings. "Make sure you're okay." I blinked. "I'm fine. You seem, I don't know, distant," she continued, brow furrowing in polite concern. I almost laughed. "Vanessa, we haven't had a real conversation in 5 years." She gave a little laugh, the kind that begged forgiveness without ever offering it. "Well, you're here now. That counts," I almost replied. Almost asked if she even knew what city I lived in now, what my company had achieved this quarter, what risks I was taking. But I didn't. Because what would be the point? She was already glancing over her shoulder before I could say anything, her attention sliding off me like water off glass. As she walked away, a thought settled in my chest, heavy but strangely freeing. She didn't see me, and maybe she never would. But I was done dimming myself to fit into a picture I was never invited to belong in. The reception was in full swing by the time I felt the first flicker of exhaustion settle into my bones. Dinner plates clinked under the low amber light of the chandeliers. The string quartet had been replaced by a DJ spinning ambient lounge mixes no one seemed to truly hear. Guests leaned back in their chairs, wine glasses tilted at easy angles as they laughed and gossiped with the relaxed abandon of people who believed the world was theirs to inherit. I sat near the back, cutting my herb-crusted halibut into neat, untouched squares, pretending to listen as my cousins debated honeymoon destinations. Every so often, someone would glance my way, smile politely, then turn back to their conversation about European villas or trust fund management. Vanessa and Logan held court at the front table, illuminated by a custom monogram projection that glowed V and L in looping gold script across the ballroom ceiling. Around them, Logan's family clustered like satellites, orbiting their crowned star. Gloria, his mother, sat ramrod straight, her face immobile in its surgical perfection. She hadn't spoken to me directly all night, but I'd felt her gaze slide over me repeatedly each time with that same dismissive curiosity reserved for art pieces she deemed uninspired. "Isn't she the sister who's always working?" I heard her murmur once to a woman beside her. Their laughter was quiet, polite, almost bored. As though my existence was an anecdote they'd grown tired of repeating. I excused myself before dessert. My seat felt too small. My skin felt too tight. I needed airspace, anything other than the cloying perfume of roses and money and curated perfection. At the bar, I ordered a ginger ale with no ice. As I sipped, staring into the swirling amber liquid, I felt the ache rise in my chest again. That familiar sting of alienation, of being in a room full of people who thought they knew me when in truth they'd never seen me at all. I felt him before I saw him. A subtle shift in the atmosphere, a hush of tension, a presence that commanded silence without needing to ask for it. Edward Sinclair was rising from his seat at the head table, slowly, deliberately. He wasn't flashy like the rest of Logan's family. No oversized designer logos. No exaggerated tan. Just a tailored navy suit that fit like it had been sewn onto his bones, silver hair swept back with understated elegance, and eyes that missed nothing. The room quieted as he stood. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Even Vanessa, radiant and laughing moments before, fell silent, her smile frozen in place. He stepped forward past Logan and Vanessa, past Gloria, whose lips parted in uncertain confusion, and then he did something no one in that room could have predicted. He bowed. A clean, full, formal bow. The kind of gesture reserved for royalty or revolutionaries. The kind of bow you give to someone who has power beyond titles. Gasps erupted around the ballroom. Camera shutters clicked. Someone dropped a fork with a sharp clatter. I didn't move. I couldn't. My breath sat frozen in my throat as Edward straightened and walked toward me with measured, purposeful steps. When he reached me, he spoke in a voice low but clear enough for the closest tables to hear. "Miss Vaughn," he said, inclining his head once more, "it's a privilege to finally meet you. Your keynote at the Zurich Summit changed how we handle tech transitions across 3 subsidiaries. I owe you a thank you." Silence spread like a shockwave through the ballroom. Every pair of eyes shifted, recalculating, reweighing. The woman they had dismissed as a pitiful, unmarried afterthought was now being honored by the most powerful man in the room. I felt the familiar armor slide into place over my skin. I lifted my chin, met his gaze, and gave a small, deliberate smile. "Thank you, Mr. Sinclair," I replied evenly. "It's mutual." For the first time that night, no one laughed. No one whispered. They just watched, listening, finally listening. Edward didn't return to his seat immediately. Instead, he gestured subtly to a nearby waiter who approached with silent deference. "A club soda for the lady," Edward said before turning back to me. "Would you mind walking with me for a moment?" I hesitated only a breath before nodding. Not out of flattery, but because I could feel the ripple that moment had caused in the ballroom, and I wanted to let it settle exactly as it should. As we walked together toward the terrace, the weight of their gazes pressed against my back like 100 invisible hands. But I didn't flinch. I didn't shrink. I let them look. Because for the first time all evening, I wasn't the ghost haunting their perfect party. I was the force that had just rewritten the script. The terrace air was cooler than I expected, a quiet relief after the oppressive warmth of the ballroom. The night was cloudless, revealing a velvet sky dusted with scattered stars. From here, the music felt muted, as though the glass doors filtered out the false laughter and polite applause, leaving only the hum of cicadas and distant city sounds. Edward Sinclair moved beside me with the unhurried calm of a man who never needed to rush. His hands were tucked lightly into his pockets. His posture relaxed, yet unmistakably commanding. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was surprisingly comfortable, honest in a way the ballroom could never be. Finally, he said in a low, steady voice that broke the quiet without disturbing it, telling me he meant what he said inside and that he had recognized me the moment I entered. I glanced at him, arching a brow, replying that it was funny because most of his family didn't seem to. A quiet laugh rumbled in his chest as he explained they wouldn't, that they only knew what they'd been told, adding that Vanessa's family had always struck him as focused on surface value. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. His gaze drifted out onto the manicured lawns as he continued reminding me that 3 years ago my firm launched the integration model for decentralized AI data recovery. Winchester Group, his company, had been prepared to invest $180 million in a competitor, but my keynote at Zurich changed everything. My projections, my risk analyses, they shifted their entire strategy. I blinked at that revelation, surprised, because it wasn't public information, telling him I didn't realize Winchester had been considering that acquisition. He replied simply that they didn't, but he made it his business to know who was actually changing the world behind the scenes. His eyes turned to me with a frank intensity that weighed rather than merely watched. I asked lightly if he had mentioned any of this to Logan, letting dry amusement slip into my voice, and Edward's lips curled faintly as he told me Logan barely knew how to check his own email, that he was a decent enough boy, but had inherited everything and never built anything. He paused then, letting the quiet settle between us before adding that I miss Vaughn built from the ground up. Those words landed with more force than I expected because he was right. While Vanessa was curating her image for the world to applaud, I was pitching to stone-faced investors at dawn, writing code until my wrists ached, eating cheap takeout in rented offices with failing heaters, wondering if the next round of funding would come in time to pay my team. I didn't just survive the market, I shaped parts of it, and yet to my family, it had never been impressive, never been visible, never been photogenic. Edward seemed to read my thoughts as they flickered across my face. He turned to me fully, then his expression unchanging, but his voice softening by a fraction as he told me I'd built something lasting, something real, and I'd done it without anyone paving the way. That was rare. I looked away, focusing on the stone railing beneath my fingertips, asking if that was why he bowed, because I disrupted his competitor's acquisition. He chuckled, shaking his head, saying no. He bowed because respect was a currency he didn't spend easily, and because in that room someone needed to remind them what real achievement looked like. The silence stretched again, not awkward, but profound as the music inside rose into an upbeat pop song, laughter and clinking glasses drifting faintly through the glass. Finally, Edward reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a small black card embossed with his name in silver lettering. He handed it to me, saying he had a proposition. He was launching a new initiative and needed someone with my mind on the founding charter, someone who understood not just how to build, but how to rebuild from nothing with vision and clarity. I didn't answer immediately, feeling the card's sharp edges press into my palm, anchoring me to the present. For the first time in a long time, I realized I had a choice before me. One not shaped by resentment or the desire to prove myself, but by self-respect. Sensing my thoughts, he added that we could discuss details Monday because tonight wasn't the place for contracts. I agreed softly that tonight was for illusions. He smiled at that, a real smile, brief and unadorned, and replied that some illusions deserved to be broken. We stood there a moment longer, watching as the ballroom lights flickered against the terrace windows, the muffled sounds of orchestrated happiness reaching us like echoes from another world. When Edward finally turned to leave, he paused, inclining his head in a quiet farewell before stepping back inside. No grand gestures, no dramatic proclamations, just mutual respect sealed in silence. I stayed on the terrace, the cool air brushing against my skin, the scent of lilies and champagne fading behind me. I closed my eyes and breathed in the night. For the first time in years, my chest felt light, because this moment wasn't about them finally seeing me. It was about me realizing I never needed them to. When I stepped back into the ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted. It was subtle at first, a slight hush, in the hum of conversation, eyes flicking my way, and quickly darting back. But as I walked toward my table, I felt it like a ripple through the room, the recalculation, the uneasy curiosity. The woman they'd written off as pitiable was now the one who'd been bowed to by Edward Sinclair himself. Guests whispered behind manicured hands. One man I'd never spoken to straightened his tie as I passed. A woman at Logan's family table actually stood as if unsure whether protocol now required her to acknowledge me. I slid back into my seat with practiced calm, folding my napkin over my lap. Inside, my heart beat steady and quiet like a war drum muffled in velvet. I didn't need their approval, but I could feel the shift of power settling around me like a perfectly tailored coat. Then I saw her, Vanessa, She was standing at the edge of the dance floor, bouquet trembling in her hand, her smile frozen and brittle as cracked porcelain. Her eyes locked onto mine with a fury so bright it almost made me flinch. Almost? She walked toward me, each step deliberate, the train of her gown whispering against the polished floor. Guests watched with poorly concealed anticipation, the way people watch two cars drifting too close on a freeway. When she reached me, she leaned down just enough to keep her voice low, her teeth bared in what anyone else might mistake for a smile. "What was that about?" She hissed, her words clipped and trembling with rage. "Edward Sinclair bowing to you, talking to you like you're someone important." I blinked slowly, tilting my head in studied calm. That was someone recognizing what you never did. Her jaw clenched so tight I could see a vein pulse near her temple. "You couldn't let me have one day, could you?" I almost laughed. The sound rose in my throat, sharp and cold, but I swallowed it back. "One day," I repeated softly. "Vanessa, you've had a lifetime." For a second, just a flicker, I saw something crack behind her eyes. Fear. The gnawing realization that her world wasn't as secure as she'd always believed, that her stage wasn't the only stage that mattered. She straightened abruptly, blinking hard as if to clear away the momentary vulnerability. Her gaze darted around the room, taking in the watching eyes, the silence that had fallen over nearby tables. "You always do this," she whispered, her voice breaking now, despite her efforts to keep it steady. "You always make me feel like I'm not enough." I tilted my head, studying her, seeing her for the first time not as the shining golden sister, but as a woman built entirely from other people's admiration. And I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge before. "Funny," I said quietly, "because you and Mom always made me feel like I was too much." Her lips parted, but no words came out. The DJ announced the first dance, breaking the tension with a surge of romantic music. Vanessa blinked rapidly, forcing back tears that threatened to ruin her perfect makeup. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking too fast against the marble floor, her bouquet trembling like a dying bird in her grip. I watched her go, feeling a pang of sorrow cut through the cold satisfaction in my chest. Not pity, not regret, just sadness for the girl she had once been. The girl who might have been my sister if the world hadn't taught her to shine only by casting someone else in shadow. As the lights dimmed for the couple's first dance, I felt Edward Sinclair's gaze on me from across the room. He inclined his head slightly, his expression inscrutable, but I saw the flicker of approval in his eyes. Guests shifted uncomfortably as Logan led Vanessa to the dance floor. Her smile was back in place, teeth gleaming under the spotlight, but her eyes remained glassy, unfocused. Around me, I felt the weight of silent questions. Who was I really? What had I done to earn Edward Sinclair's respect? Their curiosity now was laced with unease, the knowledge that the narrative they'd built about me was crumbling beneath their feet. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt utterly, profoundly powerful. Not because they finally saw me, but because I realized I no longer needed them to. The dinner plates were being cleared when Logan's father rose for the final toast. He stood unsteadily, a flush creeping up his neck from too many glasses of Bordeaux. Guests quieted in polite anticipation as he tapped his spoon against his crystal goblet, the chime ringing through the hushed ballroom. "Family," he began, his voice thick with practiced warmth. "Marriage is about joining not just two people, but two legacies. Two families." He paused for effect, eyes scanning the room with the smug pride of a man who believed he'd orchestrated this union himself. "Logan, Vanessa, you two are perfect together. Your love shines so bright it makes the rest of us look dim in comparison." Guest chuckled dutifully. Vanessa beamed up at him, her eyes glassy with tears she hoped looked delicate and beautiful under the spotlight. Logan reached over, squeezing her hand, his smile wide and toothy. And of course, Logan's father continued, his gaze sliding casually toward my table. We're grateful to have all the family members here tonight, even those who prefer the boardroom to the ballroom. Laughter rippled through the guest, small, restrained, but enough to sting. Enough to remind everyone of their assigned roles in this carefully curated social hierarchy. I felt the burn creep up my throat, bitter and familiar. The quiet humiliation. The knowledge that no matter what I built or achieved to them, I would always be the awkward afterthought. The successful sister no one quite knew what to do with. But before the laughter could settle, before I could swallow down the rage and lift my glass in silent surrender, Edward Sinclair rose from his seat. The shift in the room was immediate. Conversation ceased mid-breath. Forks paused halfway to lips. Even Logan's father froze his mouth open around the next rehearsed platitude. Edward didn't tap his glass or clear his throat. He simply stood, his presence alone commanding attention. "If I may add something to that," he said, his voice calm but carrying effortlessly to every corner of the ballroom. All eyes turned to him. Vanessa stiffened beside Logan, her fingers tightening around her bouquet until the stems bent under her grip. Edward's gaze swept the room, cool and measured, before landing on me. "It takes very little talent to inherit wealth." He began, his tone devoid of malice, but sharp enough to slice through the quiet like a blade. "It takes even less to marry into it. But the woman sitting beside me tonight, Juliet Vaughn, she has done neither." A hush fell so deep, it was almost holy. The only sounds were the soft clinks of glasses being set down carefully, as though guests feared interrupting a moment too powerful to tarnish. "She's created value where there was none," Edward continued, his eyes never leaving mine. "She's earned respect in rooms most of you will never be invited into, rooms where real decisions are made, where futures are built." Silence pressed down on the ballroom like a storm cloud, heavy and electric. No one moved. No one dared smile politely now. "So, if we're raising glasses tonight," Edward said, lifting his goblet high, "mine is to her, to Juliet. May we all learn what it means to build something that cannot be bought or married into, but forged by brilliance, resilience, and courage." For a heartbeat, the room remained frozen. Then slowly, reluctantly, guests lifted their glasses. Some looked confused, others resentful, but many looked at me with something new in their eyes, respect tinged with fear. I didn't smile. I didn't nod or tilt my chin in acknowledgement. I kept my gaze steady on the linen tablecloth in front of me, one hand resting lightly on the stem of my glass, the other still in my lap. Because there is something far more powerful than being praised. It's being understood. And in that moment, I realized someone in this room finally saw me for who I was, not Vanessa's sister, not the pitiful single woman, but the architect of my own story. Across the ballroom, I saw my parents. My father sat, rigid eyes narrowed in confusion, as he tried to recall what I'd once told him about my work 5 years ago. My mother clutched her napkin in both hands, blinking rapidly, her polite smile trembling at the edges. Vanessa, sitting beside Logan, looked like she wanted to scream. Her lips were pressed so tightly together they'd turned bloodless. Her bouquet shook with the force of her clenched grip. Edward sat down beside me again, his expression unreadable. He didn't say another word, nor did I. We didn't need to. The toast had said everything. All around us, guests began murmuring, the din swelling into a wave of uneasy conversation. But beneath it, I felt something shift permanently, an unspoken rearrangement of the room's gravity. For the rest of the night, no one dared dismiss me with pitying smiles or whispered judgments. They didn't know what to say, so they said nothing at all. And for the first time in my life, their silence felt like victory. After Edward's toast, the room rearranged itself around me. People who had spent the evening dismissing me now shifted in their seats, uncertain of the new etiquette. A few stood as I passed on my way to the bar, fumbling awkward greetings. One man, a junior executive from a firm I'd acquired years ago, approached me with wide, nervous eyes. "Miss Vaughn, I didn't realize you were that Juliet Vaughn." I looked at him evenly, letting the silence stretch before replying, "You still don't." He swallowed hard, nodded jerkily, and retreated to his table, murmuring something to his equally nervous wife. When I returned to my seat, my parents were there, hovering with hesitant smiles frozen on their faces. My father cleared his throat. That was quite a speech he gave, he said, glancing at Edward with uneasy respect. My mother reached for my hand, her touch light tremulous, as though testing the temperature of an unfamiliar ocean. "We didn't know about all that," she whispered. "Zurich, Edward Sinclair."